Brandon Aiyuk has officially requested a trade. Where might he land and what is his current dynasty value? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting the way we'd like them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her at Yahoo Fantasy and Behind the Steel Curtain. And it's a Wednesday show, so of course that means Matt Williamson is here. Follow him on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. Check out his new YouTube channel as well. On today's show, we're going to answer your Twitter questions, including how much upside does Will Levis have in Superflex leagues? How do you value injuries? But let's start with Brandon Aiyuk, Matt, who officially, I guess, requested a trade on Tuesday from the 49ers. I just want your general thoughts on, do you believe the 49ers are going to entertain trading him at all?
Well, for those that don't know, I also host another Locked On podcast, Peacock and Williamson, and Peacock is the host of Locked On 49ers. So we've talked about this to no end, especially with a little bit of Steeler angle thrown in as well. And he's pretty convinced, and I tend to agree, that the Niners aren't going to move him. I mean, they have one goal, and that's to win the Super Bowl this year. Maybe they would have entertained it before the draft, or they could have got assets for this year. And I don't think they're going to get a player in return. So I tend to think they're just going to play hardball with them and then see what happens and maybe deal Debo after the season or whatever. But we do know that players can cause problems and, be a distraction. And they have plenty that they would probably compete with Pearsall and guys like that without him. But they're obviously not as good of a team. So I don't know. I mean, I lean towards he's staying. This is much ado about nothing. He's also doing his best to get the biggest contract he possibly can. But I've also heard a lot of people say that the Niners have put their best offer out there and he doesn't think it's good enough. And therefore, something's got to give.
Kate, what are your thoughts?
I think the 49ers are in a very interesting position, right? We've seen honestly year after year of the 49ers doing this, kind of holding out these contract negotiations until the final hour. We saw it with Nick Bosa. We saw it with Deebo Samuel, kind of this like till the last hour kind of holdout situation. But as you mentioned, Matt, if they truly have already issued their best and final offer for Brandon Aiyuk, I have to imagine that, like, if it's not this year, it's got to be next year. You look at the long-term outcome of this, right? Wide receivers aren't getting any cheaper. You're going to have CeeDee Lamb probably match Justin Jefferson's contract. But then, like, once the contracts are kind of set for this year, and then we get salary cap information for the following season, he's suddenly going to be in a position with even more leverage. So, like, I do think that the 49ers are in a position where they're kind of up against the wall. If they view Brandon Aiyuk as a true long-term option for this offense. Now, obviously they can franchise tag him once in 2025, franchise tag him again in 2026. But like, again, I think if we've looked at the way he's handled this situation, he's been so outspoken, so vocal. It's been so distracting. He's missed, OTAs, training camp starts next week. Will he report? Like, there are so many nuances to this situation, but I just keep going back to the fact that, like, he's not getting any cheaper. If they don't get a deal done this year, that price tag only goes up exponentially. And then you're paying Brock Purdy. You're paying, like, it becomes even more impossible to actually keep him on the roster if they don't get this deal done now. I don't know.
I want to add something in. Mike Silver reported, who works for the San Francisco Chronicle. He reported yesterday that there's at least one team out there that's willing to give Brandon Aiyuk the contract that he wants. And that's probably what's making this hard for the 49ers is Aiyuk knows what he could potentially get on the quote unquote open market, and the 49ers just aren't giving it to him. But Matt, I want to ask you about some potential trades, and Kate, please chime in here. So
before we do, I want to throw one thing in there. Is the biggest lesson I've ever learned in this business is don't listen to what teams say, but pay attention to what they do.
Yeah.
And we mentioned Pearsall, but it kind of goes overlooked. They drafted Jacob Cowing in the 4th round as well. I mean, draft 2 receivers, then you give money to Jennings, who's their number 3 that they love, and then you give money to McCaffrey. And Peacock has thrown this out there after the McCaffrey deal that he thinks the long-term plan for McCaffrey is to make him the Debo, that just to kind of make him more receiver than running back. You can always draft the back in the Shanahan system, plug them in. It just doesn't leave enough spots for Aiyuk and Debo for sure. I mean, something has to give, whether it's now or after the season. And as Kate mentioned, you're going to pay Purdy. I mean, that's right around the corner. So it just doesn't add up.
All right, so right now, Brandon Aiyuk is being drafted as wide receiver 15 on Dynasty League football. Matt, I want to give you some teams where I think he could potentially land. Let's start, of course, with your Pittsburgh Steelers. If he gets traded to the Steelers, does his dynasty value go up or down?
See, I think most teams, the answer is up. Just because the Niners don't throw the ball a ton, they don't run a ton of plays, and there's a lot of mouths to feed. We even mentioned George Kittle's name today, and I assume Pearsall's going to get on the field someday. You don't use a 1st-round pick for him not to. But the Steelers aren't one of them. I mean, they're going to lead the league in run percentage or close to it. They're going to play with heavy personnel. He, of course, would be out there every snap with Pickens, but uncertainty at quarterback going forward, I think that would be a drop in his, in his value.
Kate?
I think theoretically, Matt, you're probably right, but I think there are so many variables that it's kind of hard to peg the Steelers in particular from a dynasty perspective. They don't have a starting quarterback on the roster beyond the 2024 season. That's a big question mark. They have plenty of available cap space in the years to come. I think they rank top 5 in available cap space each of the next 3 seasons. Great news for, offering Brandon Aiyuk a contract extension, finding a quarterback potentially on the open market. But I think because of all these levels of uncertainty, does George Pickens get a new deal? Like, the Steelers are probably, from a dynasty perspective, one of the most difficult situations to pan out.
Yep.
I think if they traded for Brandon Aiyuk and paid him, I don't know what that would mean for George Pickens. I think George Pickens is a very good wide receiver, but he's not as good as Brandon Aiyuk. In that circumstance, would the Steelers kind of move forward and kind of keep taking these 2nd-round shots, 3rd-round shots on wide receivers that, to this point, if you have your wide receiver 1 secured, right? Like, if you're drafting your wide receiver 2, they found the Juju Smith-Schusters. They found the ancillary pieces. And this is a team that drafts and develops wide receivers pretty well. So, like, I think there are so many different variables, but I do think from a perspective, at least for 2024, Brandon Aiyuk playing opposite George Pickens with Russell Wilson at quarterback, who I still think is pretty underrated in terms of what he actually did in 2023 versus the public perception. Like, Steelers are the hardest team for me to outline.
Let's do some rapid fire here with some of these other teams. You just
again, I'm gonna throw one more thing in. Can't get stuck on the Steelers. Kate had great points, and I do think there's a possibility that this might be the team that decides we're just going to take a day 2 wide receiver every year and recycle them and develop them. We're good at it. It's financially sound. It's a decent move. And Kate mentioned, I mean, Russell Wilson, I don't know if he'll be here past this year or not, but he threw 26 touchdown passes and didn't play the last 2 games of the year. The Steelers throw 26 touchdown passes over like a 30-game stretch lately. I mean, Pickett throws 13 a year. I mean, they get to like 16. Like, they might actually throw touchdown passes this year.
We'll see.
That would be crazy.
Dare to dream.
Yeah, really quickly, let's just do some up, down, no change for Aiyuk's value. The New England Patriots, Matt.
Down, at least for now.
Immediate dip, especially in 2024 production. Long term, I'm okay with the Patriots as a landing spot.
Broncos.
Ooh, these are all bad spots.
They're
I'm going to
all
also
teams that
go
need
down.
receivers, though.
Right. I'm also going to go down.
Kate?
I will go up.
Okay. Yeah, a little.
No. Sorry. Stable.
Stable. Okay.
I forgot I could say stable.
Last one here. Some rumblings on Twitter this morning. Brandon Aiyuk to the Raiders, reuniting with Antonio Pierce, who was one of his coaches at Arizona State, in a trade that would send Devontae Adams to the 49ers. Aiyuk in Las Vegas, up, down, stable.
Down. I don't trust that organization, coaching staff, quarterback situation.
Kate?
Down. But what about, there are some other organizations that I think are probably a little under the radar. He's been tied to the Washington Commanders.
Yep.
I think that would be probably a long-term win. Maybe some question marks about, can Jaden Daniels sustain 2 receiving options, but they don't have a great receiving tight end. Or I think the Jets are kind of a sneaky option as they're going all in 2024. Aaron Rodgers in the final year of his deal. And let's be honest, besides the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Jets might have some of the worst receiving core depth in the National Football League, behind Garrett Wilson, obviously a superstar. There might be some players in the mix here that we're not even really considering yet.
We'll have to see. We're going to continue to monitor the Brandon Aiyuk trade market over the next several weeks. I'm sure we'll get some kind of news, and we'll make sure we follow up there. But let's get to.
I also find it super interesting is if Aiyuk were to move, does McLaurin then end up in Pittsburgh? Does Devontae Adams then end up in Pittsburgh? Yeah, exactly. There could be 2 moves.
Yes. I think we're going to see a ripple effect whenever Brandon Aiyuk does get traded. Let's get to some more Twitter questions, including what is the upside for Will Levis in year 2? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Listen, I love sports. There's nothing more that I love than at the end of the day, sitting in my recliner, turning on not 1, not 2, but 3 of my TVs and watching all of the games at night. But unfortunately, with the playoffs winding down, NBA playoffs are over, the NHL playoffs are over. We just have fewer and fewer games to watch, and the sports aren't sporting the way we'd like them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, our next question comes from Joshua. He wants to know, what is the upside for Will Levis, and is he poised for a breakout season, Matt?
So let me preface this by saying there's many, many examples of year 2 quarterbacks that take a noticeable step forward. They get a whole offseason. They understand the speed of the game, et cetera, et cetera. And I commend the Titans to no end, even if they overpaid, for going and getting a supporting cast. You got friendly backs to dump the ball to, Ridley, Hopkins, Chig. They got enough receivers, and they finally invested in an O-line and an O-line coach. So his situation probably won't be to blame. I just don't see it with this player, though. I think his feel for the position is poor. I don't think he throws with touch. But more than anything, his biggest flaw, which is a fatal one to me, but can be corrected, he loves getting hit. He begs people to hit him as hard as possible. I know you're big and strong, but you don't have to run over defensive tackles and linebackers or hold the ball for 7 seconds and get hit in the face. I mean, protect yourself a little bit.
Yeah, my comp for him coming out of Kentucky was Rocky Balboa. Like, he just seems like he invites the contact and does not protect his body at all, right?
I was going to say Johnny Knoxville.
That's Johnny Knoxville's. Well, that's our Jaden Daniels comp, right?
Okay.
Because he's long, it's tall
smaller,
and skinny
yeah.
like Johnny Knoxville. But Kate, I know you are a big fan of Will Levis. What do you think?
I do think there's some upside there. We actually talked about him earlier this week on our quarterback show as a massive value based on his ADP right now. Now, again, kudos to the Titans. They've done an excellent job of getting him a suitable supporting cast. They upgraded the offensive line. They did a lot of things to put Will Levis in a position to take that year 2 leap. And to your point, Matt, doesn't necessarily always have that touch that you're looking for in those, especially in that short range, right? But when I'm looking at upside, I'm looking at this big-bodied quarterback who just so happened to lead the league with a 22.4% deep pass attempt rate. 57 deep pass attempts last year. That ranked 16th among all quarterbacks, tied Brock Purdy with the number of deep pass attempts. And let's not forget, he only played 9 games, and only 8 of those he played full allotment of snaps.
And I think the Titans had the fewest pass attempts in the league. I mean, so that's a high percentage.
It's a high percentage. And I think in terms of if you're charting upside, chucking the ball down the field to a Treylon Burks, I don't know, name the wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, Nick Westbrook-Akine, chucking the ball down the field to Nick Westbrook-Akine is not akin to chucking the ball down the field to a Calvin Ridley. They made some massive upgrades. You also have Tyler Boyd, which I think gives them an awesome option in the slot. I also think the moves they've made to secure a true perimeter receiver frees them up to do some more creative things with Treylon Burks and get him back into this sort of power slot role that he had in college. I love the weapons around Will Levis. I love the fact that he is with Jameis Winston playing backup right now, he's right now the king of YOLO in the NFL. And it's we don't even care.
So the interesting thing about Will Levis is the price continues to be very, very cheap. Right now on Dynasty League Football, QB 25. Quarterbacks ahead of him include Kirk Cousins at age 35, Matt Stafford at age 36, Bo Nix, Bryce Young, Deshaun Watson. Matt, at that price, are you interested at all, or are you more likely just to pass on quarterback and go somewhere else?
No, I'm interested in the price. I mean, we haven't even mentioned he does offer something with his legs, too. Yep. He's a good athlete, and he will get us some yardage on the ground, which is super important. I'm super interested to see, do they treat him like Burrow? Is he just going to sit in shotgun and read things out in 11 personnel and be, his superpower be accuracy and above the shoulder stuff? Because I don't think that's what he is. So I'm really interested to see how this coaching staff treats him, in terms of what they ask of him. There is ability there. And at that price, I'm fine buying him. I like him more for fantasy than I do the real world, I guess is my bottom line.
Matt, one of the things I want to say is you look at this roster and it doesn't feel like a Tennessee Titans offense that we've become accustomed to watching, because everything feels like it's designed to be a wide open spread offense between adding Calvin Ridley, right? Chigakonkwo is a vertical yards after catch tight end. And then their 2 running backs, Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard, they're not really grinders, right? They are guys that are explosive plays, use them out of the backfield as receivers. Is there just a chance that this team lives in 11 personnel and they're in shotgun 95% of the time, and we just see them play at a pace that maybe only a couple other teams in the NFL could match?
I absolutely think that could be the plan. I mean, we said to pay attention to what they do, not what they say. All their offseason moves mimic the Bengals to a lot of degree, and even more finesse, more speed at the running back position than Cincinnati had, and even more potency at the tight end position than Cincinnati has. I just don't think Burrow and Levis are the slightest bit similar.
Okay.
They're definitely not the slightest bit similar. But I do also want to point out, so you said, kind of look at what the team has done. The team had the number 7 overall pick. They took J.C. Latham out of Alabama, another piece to shore up their offensive line. But I have to imagine with the way that they've gone about this offseason, having been in position with the number 7 pick, which is, reasonably within striking distance. If they saw one of these top end quarterbacks in the class, it was a relatively deep quarterback class. They were in striking distance, right? If they had question marks about Will Levis, they were in a position where they could have alleviated some of those question marks by drafting a JJ McCarthy. Like they had options, right? And they forewent those those options,
Gone.
and they decided to build around Will Levis, which I have to imagine that Brian Callahan came in and he's liked what he's seen out of Will Levis. And I think the organization has to have some level of faith that Will Levis could be the guy, or else I think they probably would have gone about this offseason in a much different way.
I think that's a tremendous point. My only counter to that is ownership might have said, we're hiring a coach and we're not going out and getting a quarterback. We're hiring a coach to make Will Levis right, and you got a year to at least show us it's a chance. And he might, I'm not saying it won't happen.
If not, Mason Rudolph taking over the reins of this spread.
That's a sneaky one, by the way.
There you go. No, it's not. All right, let's talk about injuries and how it impacts the dynasty value of players. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to make sure that you have quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In any given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. Only on LinkedIn can you get 86% of small businesses that will get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. You can hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Everydayers, on tomorrow's show, we're going to look at the receivers that you must draft in every single format this year. Dynasty, redraft, best ball, daily, whatever. 3 receivers that must be on your team, so make sure you tune in for that. But let's finish up here with a question from Craig. He wants to know, how much do you factor in a player coming off a season-ending injury when forecasting their value? If a star in their prime goes down in week 7 with a serious injury, do you adjust his potential for the upcoming year, or do you assume that he will recover and have equal production? Matt, what do you think?
Let me dance around the question a little, because I think that one's very specific to each player, and we're at the mercy of the media telling us about TJ Hawkinson or Nick Chubb or whatever.
Or
really
Anthony
don't
Richardson in
know.
this case.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. But injuries as a whole, one tip I like to give people is really pay attention, especially veterans, to Wednesday practice reports. If the guy on your dynasty team is consistently not doing anything on Wednesdays during the season, they're holding them together with duct tape. I mean, they know that they're just trying to get him to Sunday, and chances are he's not long for this world, no matter what position he plays. But injuries as a whole, to me, I like to buy the discount because, frankly, I'm cocky. I just look at my roster and say, okay, this guy's, quote, injury prone or going to miss some time. I'm such a smart owner, I can find his replacement in the meantime, or I'll develop talent, or especially dynasty leagues have 25-man rosters. I have 7 other running backs to pick from. I'm not going to have garbage on my team. I'm going to be a strong owner while this dude's sitting out.
Kate, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm especially in dynasty, right? I think the biggest question for me when I'm trying to evaluate how much to factor in these injuries, it's so dependent on where your team is at, right? If I'm, my starting running back goes down and I'm a contending team, yeah, I'm probably going to devalue that player a bit more in the grand scheme of my roster, maybe prioritize and value a immediate contributor over, even if it's not necessarily tit for tat in my rankings, like when it comes to actually building my roster, I might value the immediate contributor with maybe less long-term potential value over, the better asset that's injured. If I'm rebuilding, I don't care. I don't care about the injuries. So for me, I think it's a lot based on kind of what your team's goals are at that specific moment that's going to give you the most insight as to how much you should factor in these injuries.
And Matt, doesn't a lot of it just depend on the injury to that type of player? For example, if you are a running back that relies on quickness and speed, I'm going to make up a injury, right? Let's say it's Tony Pollard, who is very much a speed running back, and he tears his Achilles. I think you're going to value that a lot more than maybe a power running back who's coming off a torn ACL. I mean, obviously, Achilles is more serious than a torn ACL, but you get the point. Like it does matter the injury to the type of player that we are discussing.
100%. I wish I understood that better. I've said pretty much throughout my career, talking about injuries, I'm not sure I know much more than the average listener, I mean, but I do think there are some that's specific to position or style of play are massive red flags. And along those lines, folks, high ankle sprains are way worse than everybody tells you they are.
Yes, they're worse than a broken
just
foot.
know that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. The same thing. If you get a high ankle sprain early in the year, in some ways, I know a lot of players would just rather break their ankle because it'll heal faster and they'll get back to 100% faster than a high ankle sprain. We've seen this tightrope ankle surgery happen more and more often to help some of these players get back on the field quicker. But to answer Craig's question, I think it really depends on the player, and it also depends on the age, right? A player tearing their ACL at age 22 is completely different than a player tearing their ACL at age 29. Look at Breece Hall. Breece Hall was able to bounce back a year later and look mostly like himself. But if a running back does it at age 28, the odds of them ever getting back to where they were pretty low.
Yeah, injuries are a very nuanced discussion. And with that, I encourage, our listeners to follow really good research analysts, fantasy PT, right? I'm trying to think of like some of my absolute favorites, but
Vanya Bell is one of the best out there. Yep.
Matthew Betts of the fantasy footballers. Like there are so many really smart injury analysts out there, and all of them, I pay very close attention to their work because they know so much more than we do. But again, such a nuanced thing, and especially because of how quickly modern medicine has kind of revolutionized where we sit. I mean, just a couple of years ago, you would have looked at a ruptured Achilles and said like, okay, we're done. Like you're done playing football, right? And this is the end of your career. Aaron Rodgers, I still call BS on it, but he was about to make a potential comeback if this team were in playoff contention. Like,
well, maybe.
Maybe. But like the landscape when it comes to fantasy injuries and the advances, I think do come so rapidly that you have to lean on some of these awesome analysts. Edwin of Fantasy Points, Matthew Betts of the Fantasy Footballers. I don't know if you guys want to shout out anybody else, but like those are the guys I lean on when it comes to advice.
All right. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the YouTube channel. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcast. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. You can read her at Behind the Steel Curtain and Yahoo Fantasy. Go follow Matt on Twitter at at Williamson NFL. Check out his YouTube channel as well. I'm at Marcus _Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.